Well, good afternoon, Scott Baker. I predict this is going to be a fun one for us.
Okay. All right. Lead better time. And we look at today's field note for Wednesday, October 8th. Our field note would be 1581. We're getting into we've had a couple of like really direct field notes lately that we can just jump right into. This one, we're going to get into a little bit of lingo, but the headline is Leaders Who Discount Long-Term Rewards and Risks. All right. So here's the risks, the rewards, they're out there. We've used the term discount, right? So the idea would be we see those rewards and risks out there, but we got some priorities right now. So let's not think about that right now.
Right.
That's kind of where we are going into this.
We can't help but talk about the marshmallow test with this, right? That's probably going to be a proxy for a lot of what we talk about. So we should probably review the marshmallow test, right?
Now, wouldn't it have been really cool? Like I should have been thinking ahead. I should have brought and not like I had no idea you were going to say, which I didn't know you were going to say that. But if I had just said and just suddenly just picked up a marshmallow and just started, that would have been kind of fun. I could have done yeah.
Yeah, we need to figure out how to make audio only marshmallow surprises.
Yeah. By the way, actually, point in fact, the people that would be listening to this on the podcast feed don't know whether I do or not. So I actually could have gone the marshmallow test.
That marshmallow that you've got in your hand.
I just happen to have one here. Let me. It's they're just so delicate, and it's the texture, and it's just the right amount of bite to it that it pushes back.
We could have our producer off camera turn his microphone on and make the smacking sounds with his lips, right? Come in and
and I had a place near me where they actually had these gourmet marshmallows. I was like, come on, can a marshmallow be better than a marshmallow? Right. Oh yes, they can. They can be really fantastic.
So here's the thing. If you've got a normal marshmallow on your plate and you tell the kid, wait till I come back. And if you wait till I come back, you'll have 2 marshmallows. Or if it's more of an adult idea, it's like one of these gourmet marshmallows that you talk about. Like, is it worth it? Right.
Yeah.
And I think the purpose of it was to be able to determine those who had lower impulse control, how did it actually serve them later in life? And I believe that 30 years after the fact, that they were great findings that were really solid, but 40 years after the fact, they couldn't really reproduce those results. And they're under question now as to whether or not that was something that it should be a consideration. But either way, it does set up the idea of what those long-term results, what those long-term rewards and risks are. So I think we'll end up using this proxy. Maybe we'll be using marshmallows as our long-term, 2 marshmallows in the future. If your boss has something for you, is there advantage of talking about it, right? And that's really what this is about. How is it that we talk about those unknown rewards that are coming for us in the future?
Exactly. And some of them might be unknown unknowns or known unknowns. So the field note actually starts with money, which is something we more all deal with day to day. So if somebody said, hey, I'll give you $1,000 right now, or come back in a month and I'll give you $1,400. And you'd be like, all right, well, I'm going to take the $1,000 right now. Now you'd be like, well, why would you do that? I mean, because it might be worth just waiting a month to get the $1,400, unless I had some secret knowledge. I was like, I'm actually not sure you're going to be here in a month. Right. Or I think there's going to be rampant inflation between now and then, and I can spend this money right now to buy the equipment I need to get out of this country, whatever it might be, right? So there are these things that happen, and it sounds like marshmallow test, money offers, that these are things that are kind of silly, but they're not, because we're always in this situation where we're trying to make decisions about how to deploy resources personally and in teams, corporately, all kinds of organizations, around the potential of long-term reward, but also in terms of risk. Because sometimes we're like, there's going to be some risk if we do this, but you know what? That's going to be a risk for later. Kind of like the famous example where in The Simpsons, Homer is deciding that he's going to chug glasses of vodka and mayonnaise at the same time. And this is clearly not good for any kind of human being or animated character. And as being warned of that, Homer is just kind of given to say, that's a problem for future Homer.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So the way that this was illustrated for me most recently, I heard a story that Randall told in Utah, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he was talking about his notebooks actually, and he's talking about his joke notebook and his story
Mm-hmm.
notebook. And just by way of example, he said, I've got thousands of stories. This is probably my favorite. So it's not a funny story as much as it's like,
Mm-hmm.
but he told the story of Billy going in to get his haircut every week at the barber shop.
Mm-hmm.
And one barber over and the other are talking about Billy as he's coming in the door. And he says, sweet kid, but really dumber than a box of rocks, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then he's like, the other barber's like, what do you mean? He's like, well, every week at the end of the haircut, I ask him, hey, do you want $1 to go buy yourself an ice cream cone, or do you want 2 quarters? Right? And Billy always takes the 2 quarters. And so sure enough, they go through the haircut when Billy's sitting in the chair, and then he does the experiment for the other barber and says, okay, Billy, what do you want? Do you want $1 to go over to the ice cream shop and get yourself something? Or do you want 2 quarters? And every time Billy takes the 2 quarters, right? Now he sits and he thinks about it, right? He's contemplating. And then so he gives him 2 quarters and he walks out the door. And the other barber is like, doesn't really understand what's going on, but he leaves the barber shop and there's Billy out there, licking his ice cream cone. Mm-hmm. He's like, hey, Billy, you're a smart kid. He's like, yes, I am. He's like, and you know what's going on with money. And, he's like, yes, I do. He's like, so every week when he offers you $1 or 2 quarters, why do you always take the 2 quarters? And Billy says, because the first time I take the $1, the game is over, right? Like Billy knows what's going on. So the way that Randall told the story, it was just an example of a good story. He wasn't illustrating this.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But in a lot of ways, that's exactly what leaders are doing. It's like Billy had a long-term effect going on.
Right.
And so how this applies to how you
he
charge
was performing
clients.
a role that was entertaining to the barber.
Yes.
And it was a grift on his part.
Yes. Well, in some sense, right? So now, if this is a client relationship, now Randall wasn't telling the story because he was talking about how he undercharges clients in order to get long-term value out of them, right? Because that the analogy kind of falls apart there.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of ways where it stays completely intact, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, Billy knows what's going on, but should Billy, if Billy's a good human, should he stop taking advantage of the barber, right? The only reason that the story really works is because Billy has lower status in the story, right?
Yes, right.
The only reason that the story really works is because Billy has been called stupid by the barber early on, right? And so in the story, the narrative makes us feel good that Billy's getting one back over on the barber, and he's continuing to get one back over. And the longer that the barber thinks that Billy's a dummy, the longer Billy continues to get one over on. Mm-hmm. So we like that story. So there's things to learn from it, but the grift part of it is an important thing that you should say, because we need to evaluate that in the way that we handle these kinds of situations. If it's just viewed as a grift, like Billy needs to grow up and knock it off, right? Yeah. But it's not just a grift.
No, it's not at all. Now, the parts of this field note, there's a part that deals with just the nature of what it is to bargain with the future around risk or reward. And then we get into an interesting point, which we'll get to in a minute, which is you can say that you're like, we're actually pretty wise here over at our organization. We think about the current priorities, but we are also really mindful of where we're going, and both in mitigating long-term risk, but also the potential for real reward. But then if you're not actually behaving that way, putting money where your mouth is, that becomes an important factor. So we'll get to that in just a second. But on this issue of how we look to the future, these are some things that are wired into us. I mean, these are primal things that go back to to sort of early human history, and the very ideas of what the idea of sacrifice is. Sometimes these were sacrifices made for good purposes or bad purposes, and they were things that were costly. Right, you tended to sacrifice something that meant something, so that you were kind of thinking about what that would mean for you in the future. But we yet do that in the same way now. We will sacrifice by putting ourselves through physical endurance in order to have great health later on, even if it's painful in the short term, or moderately tolerable in the short term. And so we see these kinds of things to say, well, what is the right balance between saying, how can I actually get the most out of this moment or where we are, this current opportunity? And what we know is that the good leaders, who are also good decision makers, are not always only trying to maximize the next quarter, right? And certainly you know the corporate landscape is riddled with stories of companies that no longer exist, like Blockbuster or even Kodak, and ones that just didn't jump right away on digital trends or the troubles, Motorola and Nokia and those that just all of a sudden like, well, wait, some new technology came in, just, destroyed us and we didn't see it, or we had a chance to see it and we didn't. And so we should all personally be mindful of those kinds of things.
Right. So I've never heard it being called discounting this way. Right. I always thought of discounting as just completely attached to price, but you're underselling your future.
Yeah, and that is temporal discounting is actually the phrase in the field note, which is exactly that definition that you just said of time. It's time.
Yes. So there's so much that seems to be solved, for a lack of a better word, if we just increase our time horizon, right? And here recently, I've been thinking about that, like if there's any kind of conundrum or what we should do, or if there's some kind of stress in our life, and what's the solution that we put on top of it. Like I've been thinking like, okay, can we just look out 10 years here and just see what is the actual 10-year goal here? It makes such a big difference, right? To be able to consider, and there's a lot that is solved by intentionally elongating that timeline. And so when we think about like why the behaviors are as powerful as they are, and why we're always looking for admired leadership behaviors that are universal, I think a lot of the time it's because the mimetic value of these behaviors really only shows up over the course of like at least 10 years, right?
Yeah, right.
At least 20 years. Like, and then you go back into the classics behaviors of like, thou shalt not kill, right? Like, why did that take on a mimetic role of like being such a great thing? And it's because people didn't want to have to deal with the guy's brother that you ended up killing, or his cousins, right?
The tribal and familial conflicts could devastate societies. Like, I mean, your entire existence of your community could be in jeopardy because of these things.
Right. And so the notion of why it is that we are a moral people, why it is that we have these things, does not necessarily have to be rooted in old-fashioned religion as much as it's rooted in the idea of like, okay, these universal truths that have been passed down to us are really coming from people and their lived experience who have actually taken time to see, murdering someone actually makes a horrible life. Even if there's no prisons that exist, you put yourself into a prison of your own mind and your own existence, of having to kind of look over your shoulder all the time. How do I get through life now without having to look over my shoulder all the time? Right. And that's exactly what this is. Right. I know we've taken it into a different area, but the small decisions in your organization can be looked at through this exact same kind of a lens as well.
Yeah. And the patterns of reality tend to be encompass pretty powerful truths that are not just made up. That in fact is the way the world lays itself out to us. Now, you pointed to something that I think is interesting, which is sometimes we would say this discounting, this temporal discounting of the future is because of our impulsivity around doing something or wanting something now. But it could also be around this idea, and it's not even necessarily the painful part of a discipline that gets you a better future. It could be this thing that is just a matter of patience and not doing anything. Like we hear about people that, like even Warren Buffett, and they rarely buy or sell, like they hold. They just recently did a big selling of something and a big purchase of something. But that's why everybody's like, wait, what just happened? But when you think about the things that say, we're actually asking you to not do anything, because you need to wait through this. Patience is going to be the thing. Or we need you to work little by little on this behavior over time, which is a different thing than painful sacrifice.
Right.
Now, that is requiring you to kind of suppress this need for the impulse action, but it's not a quick grab for profit.
Right. Okay, so what the behavior here is like establishing a trigger that says part of my decision-making process is to stop and consider the time horizon. And then what am I looking at? Am I automatically looking at 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? Like, is that the way to ask the question?
Yeah. Well, yes. And then I think the thing I really liked in this field note is, well, what are you doing about that other than just being like thinking about it? Like you could just write down a plan and that's good. You need that. But why aren't you investing in leadership development? Or why aren't you sending people, back for extra education? Or why aren't you putting resources into development for things that are not going to be for the 18-month horizon? And a lot of companies under pressure for quarterly earnings or immediate payroll or whatever it is tend to be like, well, I hope we can get to that.
Right.
And so we need wise leaders who are able to kind of take that beat and say, no, we're not going to get there if we're not taking care of it now, bit by bit.
Right. We'd be remiss if we didn't mention this a couple times between now and October 14th, but I just wanted to mention that we do have our community conference, which is open to the public for anyone to be able to come and join us for free. Some of the most incredible wisdom that you would hear in a 5-hour span will start on October 14th. That's next Tuesday from 11 a.m. Eastern until 4:00 p.m. Eastern. And so go over to admiredleadership.com. Wherever you're watching this, there's probably a link somewhere up in the description or somewhere in the bio that will allow you to get to our website and for this October 14th community conference. I hope you join us.